Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome to another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI in what seems to be the end of Israel's operations against Iran and the end of the so-called 12-day war by Israel to cripple Iran's nuclear program and primarily its uranium enrichment program, together with the United States. Late last night or in the early hours of this morning in Israel, Donald Trump announced a ceasefire that was supposed to go into effect at 7 a.m. Israel time. Israel said that it was accepting the ceasefire. Missiles were launched from Iran just before the beginning or the commencement of the ceasefire, one of them slamming into a home in Be'er Sheva, 4 Israelis killed, lots of destruction. And then everything seemed to kind of go sideways a bit. A ceasefire that was supposed to go into effect. Was it still in effect? Was it not in effect? And as we record this, just shy of 3 p.m. on Tuesday, on June 24th, yes, that's the date, Donald Trump has just boarded Marine One at the White House, is flying off to a NATO summit in the Netherlands, and using 4-letter words is talking about Israel and Iran, basically saying they have no idea what they're doing, calling on Israel not to retaliate to that missile attack. Israel then going ahead and dropping some bomb on some radar installation, it seems like, and doing it symbolically. So I don't really know where this is all going, to say the least. And I think we're all in a bit of uncertainty what comes next. But I do want to get both of your reads. And I know this is difficult to predict, of course, because the situation is so fluid. Does this ceasefire hold? Is the war over? Where are we? Gil, why don't you start?
First of all, that was an excellent summary of nothing or of the complexity of where we're at or where we're not at. You know, ceasefires like wars are, the opening of the door and you don't know where it's going to end. But I want to start by going backwards and saying what Donald Trump is now calling the 12-day war had remarkable successes. And I agree with you that the essential point was to try to eliminate or reduce the Iranian nuclear program. But one of the things that I became more aware of as missile after missile after missile, over 511 huge intercontinental ballistic missiles, hit Israeli citizens and hospitals, that Iran had a program to increase the number to 6,000. Some say 8,000, some say 11,000. The numbers are irrelevant, but they're terrifying. And I think Israel has done a lot to degrade their intercontinental ballistic program from factory to launch pad. And that's also a huge achievement. The third thing, I think, is that for years, there have been 2 Iranian cons. One is Iran continued to say diplomacy, diplomacy, diplomacy. And it's shocking to me how many people to this moment still fell for the diplomatic con. But the second is, for the last 40 years, Iran has kind of been projecting power as this most powerful force in the Middle East, often, especially after the Iraq-Iran war, sacrificing others' pawns. They're happy to sacrifice Hamas, and they're happy to sacrifice Hezbollah, and they're happy to obviously have Israelis and Americans die. But they have had zero tolerance to sacrifice any of their soldiers because of the weakness of the regime. And I think we saw just how weak the regime is and how much of a paper tiger it is. So I'm not sure where we're going. But as a historian, I can say that even the initial assessment of Israel and, of course, America's support has been extraordinary and game-changing.
Shmuel, I want to get your prediction on also where this is
going.
Yeah,
Gil just dodged the bullet. He didn't give you an answer.
Kind of dodged the bullet, exactly. I did that, by the way. Remember when you and I were on a radio show last week and we were asked, and right. I said, is Trump going to attack? And I said 50-50. And the guy, the anchor, Yoav, was like, no, you have to give me a real number. But, and I was off, by the way, I was wrong. But anyhow, I mean, on the one hand, how do you see what's happening right now? And does this maintain itself? But also, I do agree with Gil. Was it the knockout? Maybe not, because we also have to wait to see, do the Iranians, have they lost the ambition? Have they lost the drive and the motivation to still pursue a nuclear capability? But definitely by points, it's a huge win for Israel and the United States.
Well, yes and no, I would say. But let me begin with the ceasefire. The ceasefire is a fragile ceasefire. And the reason it's fragile is because of what I'm going to say about the war. Is the war over? First, you have to define what is a war. When did the war between Israel and Iran begin? Did it begin 12 days ago, or 20 years ago, or maybe 30 years ago? And we are at war ever since. Only we have, ebbs and flows. Sometimes it's more, you can see more of it. Sometimes it's underground. In the recent 12 days, we saw the most vivid demonstration, violent demonstration of this war. But the war is not over. The war cannot be over because the root cause of the war is still with us. That is the intention of the Iranian regime to A, acquire nuclear weapons, and B, find a way to eliminate Israel off the map of the Middle East. Since we still have the root cause present, the war cannot be over. Israel will have to keep being watchful, keep making sure that Iran doesn't get back on its horse, so to speak, doesn't get back its weapon systems, its nuclear capabilities, etc., doesn't get back the capabilities of its proxies, such as Hezbollah and Hamas. So the war will be ongoing, only in a less violent way. And unless there is regime change in Iran or Israel is eliminated, unless one of these two scenarios happens, and you can guess which of the two I prefer to occur, the war will continue in some fashion until who knows when.
And this, you're saying the overarching war, the fact that Iran is still very much determined, which, by the
Right.
way, I think that, that's why, and this is, no one's talking about this, right? Kind of just on the regime change conversation, but that's why when you do think about what's been achieved, which is a remarkable military success, to ensure and to preserve the successes, you need one of two things to happen. One, a new nuclear deal that, let's say, once and for all removes the possibility of uranium enrichment inside Iranian territory, so removes the prospect of a weapons program, or, and maybe together, but definitely or, a regime change, a new regime that comes into office and takes over the country and says, we no longer want nuclear weapons. I mean, if one of those two things happen, then we can probably say this has been a huge victory. But, definitely the military accomplishments are truly great. Gil, I do want to go back, though, in time for a moment to just 2 days ago. It was only 2 days ago that the President of the United States did make history, sent 7 B-2 bombers to fly from Missouri all the way to Iran, to drop 14 GBU-57s. Those are known as the Massive Ordnance Penetrator. 12 of them, a dozen, were dropped over the facility Fordo, said to have caused extensive damage. 2 of them dropped on Natanz, said to have caused even more damage than what Israel had caused, and hopefully reach those lower chambers where the centrifuges are located. And then more Tomahawk missiles also on Natanz and also on the uranium conversion plant of Isfahan, fired from submarines off the coast of Iran. This was a huge, huge moment for the president, one that a lot of people, including myself, honestly, were not sure that he would take. And going up against not only his earlier promises of not going into wars, going up and changing American policy after every president since Bill Clinton had promised to stop Iran but had never really done anything. Here comes Donald Trump and does it. And going up that strong faction within the Republican Party and the MAGA movement, the so-called isolationists. I mean, how monumental and significant is this for Trump, for the remainder of his presidency? Or will he be able to say, no, look, I did this one little thing, it's done, I'm moving on?
Well, I'll see you and
And
raise
thank you, as he likes to say, thank you for your attention to this matter.
Right. I'll see you and raise you and go back 3 weeks ago and 4 weeks ago when everybody was once again saying Kaddish, mourning the death of the U.S. Israel relationship and saying, oh my goodness, you fools who supported Trump or said, oh, I'm going to hold my nose and vote for Trump because at least it's better for Israel. Look, he's such a destructive force. Now, let's start with the fact that Trump is mercurial and he has a very short attention span. I think I want to give an Israeli prize to, I think it was a Financial Times reporter who called Trump taco. Trump always chickens out, because the one thing that was killed with that American bombing raid was the notion that he always chickens out. You could say he occasionally chickens out now, but then it'd be a toco, not a taco. And but I'm making fun of it. But the important thing is in terms of the psychology of Trump, it was very, very clear that offended him, got under his skin, and that often is one of the things that gets him going. Now, to step back and talk in historic terms and in political terms, we thought April 13th, 2024, and then again October, when there was just an extraordinary integration between the CENTCOM, the American command, and Israel's command, and also we should add the Arab countries and the European countries against the two waves of Iranian missiles, really showed a kind of peak of U.S. Israel relationship. And now we've taken it to a whole other level. Now, the danger, of course, is that Israel has always said, we fight our own wars. And now this is the first time that America has really put skin in the game. But they did it in a very, I know it's not a nice word to use, but surgical way. It's a complicated world because people say, there's no such thing you can't say surgical and war in the same sentence. But it was, Trump articulated a very specific goal, achieved it. The Iranians retorted with a little slap, which was orchestrated. And now, indeed, if the ceasefire holds, he will be able to say, look, I did what I did. And Trump has made two promises on foreign policy. One, Iran will not have a bomb. And two, I'm not going to get involved in forever wars. And he might right now have squared the circle. The worrying part of all this is the growing stridency of the anti-Semitic, often isolationist Republicans, like Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene, to see them in what they call the Horseshoe Alliance with AOC and Ilhan Omar and Bernie Sanders is particularly disturbing. But you should look at the polls. The polls showed that most Trump voters, 83% of Trump voters, before Trump moved, were supporting Israel's attack on Iran and saw Iran as a threat. And so the MAGA division may be exaggerated by the MAGA loudmouths and not at the core of the party. One of the scary things we see on the Trump side is the degree to which so many Republicans just take whatever principles they have and throw them out, because if there are the never Trumpers, they are the forever Trumpers. What we're seeing on the Democratic side is two things that are very nerve-wracking to me. One is the degree to which the left wing of the party, the anti-Zionist, anti-Israel party, is running the show in many ways. And the silence of most major Democrats. Look at how cautious Jackie Rosen, a senator from Nevada who's usually very pro-Israel. Look how sniveling Chuck Schumer, who often is, were. And what they did was they lawyered, because they can't say anything positive about Donald Trump.
Although Hakeem Jeffries did have, who was we thought was more within the traditional camp, was quite critical.
Yes, he was critical, and Schumer and Jackie Rosen went into the whole war powers dance, which is a complete hypocritical dance, because we know that Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, every successful president has violated the War Powers Act, and you use the War Powers Act only to say either I don't want to make a comment or I this is my passive aggressive way of disagreeing. And so the warning signs in the Democratic Party are very disturbing in terms of the ongoing U.S. Israel relationship. The warning signs within the Republican Party are very disturbing in terms of this kind of cult of personality. It's one more example of the cult of personality around Trump.
But Shmuel, when Israel now has to navigate this, and you hear Trump as he's boarding Marine One, the helicopter, I mean, cursing out Israel, literally, alongside Iran. By the way, his Truth Social, his tweets from last night, we're also very strong. I mean, thank you, Iran. This is the country you just attacked. Now you're thanking them. We know he's not, a traditional diplomat, but this is already going maybe a bit beyond. Israel has to somehow navigate this. Now, Bibi And Strategic Affairs Minister Dermer did have quite the, I would say, diplomatic accomplishment in getting Trump not just to acquiesce or at least not give a red light to an Israeli attack, but also to get involved kinetically himself is huge for Israel. I think it's first and foremost an American interest, but definitely very important for Israel. How does Netanyahu now navigate this? Trump feels like maybe Bibi owes him. He now has Netanyahu in his pocket. How careful does Netanyahu now have to be?
Oh, he's going to be careful. Look, most of the things that Israel wanted to achieve from this round of battle was already achieved. So for Israel to keep going amid growing tension with the Trump administration would not make much sense. I think Israel is going to accept the fact that Trump is trying to walk a fine line here within America, within his own party. He was trying to be both the interventionalist and the isolationist. And he did it by striking once and saying no more and now a ceasefire. If he achieves both, then most of the right-wing isolationist wing in the Republican Party is going to relax. Okay, it was a one-time off. We are ready to live with it. And in some way, he both helped Israel and brought the two parties into some kind of agreement for a ceasefire. Look, to go back to history again, when you think about the cycles of American history and what Trump achieved in his decision to bomb Iran, it is somewhat similar to what George H.W. Bush achieved back in the early 90s when he broke the curse of Vietnam. After the Vietnam War, Americans were highly reluctant to engage in any wars anywhere in the world. Bush, the father, identified an occasion in which he felt that the U.S. must intervene when Iraq invaded Kuwait. But it was a much more extended type of operation, but he was also quite careful to stay within the limits of the exact achievement he wanted to get. After a few days of fighting, and when the troops could, he could go all the way to Baghdad, he could topple Saddam Hussein, etc. He didn't do it. He stopped. And he said, we achieved what we wanted. We drove Iraq out of Kuwait. Now we can stop and go back home. In some way, this is what President Trump is doing. He's breaking the curse of the second Iraq war. Since 2005, 2006, Americans no longer want to intervene in foreign wars because of the Iraq war. Trump found himself facing a situation in which he felt that he wanted or needed to intervene, but he didn't want to do it in a way that will re-engage America in foreign wars similar to the one they had in Iraq. So again, he limited himself to a very specific target, very specific goal, achieved his goal, and now he's pulling out. So again, if this is successful, only time will tell, because there's always the troubling scenario of Iran announcing 2 weeks from now that they still have all the enriched uranium stored somewhere, or 6 months from now,
runaway 400 kilograms that the so-called runaway,
exactly,
where it is,
I started by saying that the war isn't over. We will have to watch Iran and see what they have, what they don't have, what are the real things that Israel and the United States were able to destroy, and whether Iran now is much further away from getting to from having a bomb. Is Iran no longer a state that can easily and quickly get a nuclear bomb? If it's 10 years away from a bomb now, the war was successful. if it's half a year away, well, it was still successful, tactically speaking, but we did not achieve the strategic goal of the war.
And that's obviously, the so-called bomb in the basement scenario, or something that we just don't know about. Even if there is the runaway 400 kilograms or less, and there's some cascades of centrifuges somewhere where no one knows, and they run them through, and they might not make the warhead, but they make a dirty bomb in a suitcase, whatever it is. You're right. This would definitely be of a different caliber. Gil, when we talk about regime change, it seemed that in Israel at some point there was a bit of a romanticization, if that's a word, with this idea that Israel, through striking at the regime targets and more, could bring about a regime change. And you'd see the person who was really talking about it the most was Defense Minister Yaakov Katz, who kept on tweeting, "I've instructed the army to attack regime targets and undermine, destabilize the regime," as if, it's like opening up the skies over Iran. You take out a radar station and some surface-to-air missile systems, you now have freedom of flight. You do the same and you've now have a regime change. I don't know how he understood that it's that easy, but this is what he was pushing. Now, Israel has yet to achieve that. It could be that the Iranian people will take will seize this opportunity and rush to try and have the courage, by the way, it will take courage, to fight the regime and bring it down, but it might not. But in America, I think in Israel, by the way, if we were to do a poll, we would see that most Israelis would support it. I think in America, it's very different, though.
Well, as Shmuel was suggesting, Americans are traumatized. They're traumatized by the ease with which the George W. Bush administration promised that Iraq was basically had a middle class base and had oil stocks and would very quickly transition into a democracy. They're traumatized, frankly, by the Arab Spring, where everybody thought, oh, once we put that whole part of the world on Google and give them internet, then democracy will emerge. They're traumatized by Joe Biden's hasty retreat from Afghanistan. And so this is the shorthand of forever wars. So Americans are indeed wary, and they've learned an important lesson, which I think Israel has also learned, because when it's tried to orchestrate things in Lebanon and elsewhere, it just doesn't work. It's very hard to do remote control nation building, and it's very hard to export your approach to governance. And we see that Israel also has its issues in governance to another country. So I actually think that, again, if the ceasefire holds, we can say, wow, look what Israel did. Bibi Netanyahu 12 days ago said, we are launching this campaign in order to hit the nuclear spots, and it's not an operation against the Iranian people. Along the way, as I said, we not only humiliated the regime and showed that it was that it was a bit of a paper tiger, but also hit key individuals and key symbols of the regime, including their countdown to Israel's destruction clock and the prison. And that's a sweet spot. I lament the fact that Yaakov Katz tried to use this to kind of win over the Gunatic wing of the Likud party. It felt much more like politicking than statesmanship. And he should have just let us speak softly and carry a big stick. But I think that there's now an opportunity for regime change. We hear the son of the Shah calling for it. We hear others calling for it. And one of the things that Trump should be doing, and he did this quite effectively in his first term, is sitting down with people from, dare I say it, the CIA, and from the Persian dissident community, and from other parts of the national security apparatus in Kosovo and elsewhere, which have actually had more successes in creating some regime change, and saying, what can we do? What are the pressure points? How do we support the dissidents? What can we do via internet? What can we do surreptitiously? How can we find out what Mossad has up its sleeve? And let's see if this is a moment, because the regime is definitely, despite the lies that you can see on some YouTube videos, it's definitely reeling. And this is a moment of great weakness. And this is a moment of great humiliation, where Iranians also were saying, hey, wait a minute. Look at this other country, which built shelters. We have no shelters. Look at all the money and all the prestige and all the military power we invested in this program, which has gone up in smoke. And I don't think that the Iranian people are as stupid as the regime propaganda suggests.
Speaking of politics, Shmuel, I'm sure you saw yesterday how our prime minister bought himself a falafel in Rishon LeZion.
And paid with his own money.
I was going to say that, of course, paid with his own cash, right? Took it out of his own pocket and paid, which is, to those who might not understand the sarcasm, is something that's rare in these parts. But I was watching that video, and I mean, that's Bibi on election steroids, right? It was almost like if you go back and watch him going through Machane Yehuda, the shuk here in Jerusalem, standing on his car, waving at people, people singing Bibi Melech Israel, Bibi is the king of Israel. Bibi is a different Bibi. And I'll tell you something else that I've noticed from this last 12-day war is that we're now almost 2 years into the war with Hamas, October 7th. Netanyahu has not gone to Nir Oz, a place where we've spoken about this before, the three of us, a place in where one of 4 people, residents, was either murdered or abducted, has yet to visit there. But the moment the first missile hit in Ramat Gan, Bibi went there. And the moment the first missile hit in Bat Yam, he went there, and Rishon, and the same. It's interesting. Why is there a difference between the damage here from Iran and the damage then from Hamas? So tell us why there's a difference, and then tell us how quick should we buckle up for this election that's coming?
Well, the reason he's going to Ramat Gan or Bat Yam or other places, it's because going there is being identified with a successful war. Going to Nir Oz is being identified with a failed defense of Israel. It's true that people are hurt. People were hurt both in Nir Oz and in the places in which he visited in the last couple of days. But the context is very different. When you go to Bat Yam or Be'er Sheva or other places during the war in Iran, you are coming to say to the people, look, we admire your sacrifice, but your sacrifice means something. We are winning against Iran thanks to your sacrifice. Going to Nir Oz is something very different. This is where Israel neglected to defend its citizens and failed miserably on October 7th, 8th, and 9th in the early days of the war. So again, it's the context, maybe also the timing. Talking about a new election might be slightly premature, but clearly for Netanyahu to begin thinking about such option is something that he's going to do in the next coming days. I'll give you the ideal sequence for Netanyahu. It would be sealing the deal with Iran, getting to a stable ceasefire with Iran, then sealing the deal with Gaza, with Hamas, getting the hostages back, and basically ending the round in Gaza in a way that is good enough for him to present to the public. Then looking at the polls and making sure that the polls are beneficial for him. It's not quite the case yet. I did a poll last week, and the polls show 2 interesting things. Trust in Netanyahu improved dramatically in the last couple of days, including the trust of people who usually vote for the opposition. So these people who tended to say they have no trust in him now say they have some trust in him. They improved their assessment of the prime minister. So all in all, trust in Netanyahu was going up, but it doesn't yet translate to many expected votes had we have election today or tomorrow. So he'll have to watch and look at the polls and make sure that his increased popularity does translate into probable or possible votes. In such case, there is incentive for him to go to new election for 3 reasons. One, because he can win on his own terms. He can say, I brought victory, give me your vote. Number 2, because the issue of the Haredi draft is not yet resolved, and he doesn't want the next election to be on that issue. 3, economy. Israel spent huge amount of funds on this last round of war. It will have to make cuts. It will have to readjust its economy to new circumstances. And working on the next budget, the 2026 budget, is going to be very difficult for any coalition, especially for a coalition that is already seeing the next election on the horizon. Right. So maybe the exit strategy for Netanyahu would be to say, I ended the war with Iran, with Lebanon, with Gaza. I ended it with Israel as victorious. Now I'm going to call for a new election in the early or late fall, and then the next budget is going to be handled by the next government.
And we'll have another episode to talk about what will happen politically in the aftermath of such an election, and if the different parties that currently are part of the anti-Bibi camp, maybe as a result of this war, will now shift. But I want to thank you in the meantime, Shmuel, Rosner, Gil Troy of JPPI. And we'll, of course, have to wait to see what happens with this very fragile ceasefire. And does it last or does it not? Or by the time you're listening to this, Israel and Iran are back exchanging blows. I, for one, at least hope that's not the case. And I think both of you agree with me. But thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we will be back again later this week with another episode that looks at what's been happening between Israel and Iran, and hopefully can continue to do a summary of this really remarkable and historic war. Thank you.
Thank you.